last week I quoted Moody Blues, blasting, billowing, bursting forth with the power of 10 billion butterfly sneezes. Man with his flaming fire has conquered the breezes. I can't remember the rest, but basically it ends up with, and flourishing on earth. Flourishing on earth. You know, it took psychology almost 100 years to turn from pathology, that is, seeing what it is that's going wrong, mental disease, neurosis, all that stuff, to what is going right. Sometime in the 50s, a guy named Maslow started really thinking of, wait a second, neurosis, if neurosis is a failure of personal growth, then let's find those who have excelled in personal growth. And so there's this move from pathology to health, the study of those who are most stable, the most happy, the most creative, the most healthy. And what is it we define healthy as? You see, these are all huge issues, and also it's cause for hope. Because when we start looking at what is healthy, we start seeing something amazing. Now, what I'm talking about today is an attempt to talk about what is healthy. This is difficult. I listened to some of our previous podcasts, and we can't stay on the positive very long before the dark pulls us in, and we start talking about all the things that get in the way instead of what it is we can do to move onward. And it's just because the way we're set up in our worldview is to deal with pathologies. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, so to speak. But today I want to talk about the global culture that we've laid out as emerging. Not a utopian narrative, but a pragmatic justice paradigm. If I had to say, what we're talking about today is a literal change in our worldview. Our present worldview is a pyramid. Some at the top, the survival of the fittest and all that, to a new paradigm. One that is actually not new, but ancient, and it's the circle. Not top down, but a total inclusiveness down to the gnat, down to the virus we're seeing. So what happens when we begin to look at creativity? When we begin to look at that place where values have to be somehow connected to the facts? When we look at education, when we look at our own disconnection and need for connection. I mean, the Western world split emotion and reason how many thousands of years ago? And we went with reason, and it has served us well. But it also is not sufficient. It's created a worldview that is not sustainable. And so the stories we tell ourselves, our worldview is the stories we tell ourselves without even knowing it. And there's been this worldview of socialism versus the freedom of the individual. But part of what's emerging is this relationship yields a synergy between the individual and society. It can't be either or, but both and, in a delicate balance of dance, if you will. We're moving from an adversarial to a cooperative view. We're moving from where nature is something to be conquered to realizing nature is our deepest, most intimate ally. And these are part of this emerging worldview. We're realizing with the coronavirus very clearly that all the geopolitical boundaries are provisional at very best, and we set the provisions. We have realized in my lifetime that biodiversity and diversity are integral to health, wholeness, creativity. You see, we've talked about this global consciousness, and this global consciousness is emerging. There's nothing we can do to stop it. We can claim Second Amendment stuff and arm and create little militias and say we don't want it. We can become white supremacists and all this, but we cannot stop it. And the Republicans are going to learn that you cannot stop it. It's an amazing thing. What they can do is impede it. But this new global consciousness, this consciousness that says flourishing on earth, if everybody doesn't win, nobody wins. Now, my own worldview is changed with just the stories of Robert E. Lee and my Southern Roots narrative. The stories that we tell are beginning to expand, reflecting a greater complexity, a deeper truth. And who and what nature is, in her most intimate details, is being revealed to us, and we're asked to come join. She's not our adversary. This is a place where we learn to flourish on earth. It's time to tend the garden, if you will. So today, that's what we're going to. We're going to flourishing on earth. What is it we need? We know Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We know that the least among us have to be considered almost at the front of the line. We've learned over and over lessons that we have not borne well. We have not gotten those lessons and put them in practice. But flourishing on earth, I am an optimist in my deepest place. The place that is giving birth to me every moment says that there is an arc of justice, of truth, and of love that we are a part of in this unbelievable event called consciousness. So, flourishing on earth, I say hey to my cohorts here, Marianne Rudis and Bob Hayes. Bob's coming to us from Florida, and Marianne from Spokane Valley. I'm here in Spokane, up on the South Hill. And so I'll open it to you. Marianne, what say you? Let us flourish on this earth.
You brought up so many very, very important topics in that one opening, Red Hawk. And I think one of the things that you talked about were the stories that we're telling ourselves. And to me, that is just paramount. We have been telling ourselves stories of fear and scarcity for so long, and that we started to, all of our systems are devised around that. All of our corporate ladders are devised around competition rather than cooperation. Even getting into a college is based on competition. And I think that for all of us to flourish, we can't just look at our own lives. We can't just hope to flourish in our own lives. And we all want to do that. We all want to do what's best for ourselves and for our children, and to create a safe environment. But if the children across town are not safe, are any of us safe? And I think that kind of goes back to the whole idea that we are connected. And in order to flourish, we have to take off our blinders, and myself included. I have to start to open up my eyes to what can I do personally that will not only benefit myself and my family and my life, but also have a positive ripple effect on the community, on the people that I don't even know. And, there were studies done about people who were interviewed and asked about what they thought of people and the goodness of people. And within their own communities, within their own neighborhoods, people were more inclined to say people are good. But when they took that out to the outer community, but those people out there are not. And what we have to start to understand is our community is global. Our community is bigger than what we think it is. And that people, the human heart, has the capacity for such love and such graciousness and such wonder. And at the same time, the capacity for darkness. And we always kind of talk about that because that gets the headlines.
Yeah.
But there is goodness out there. And I think so to flourish, I think, yes, it begins at home, but it has to be done in a way that is going to benefit all.
Yeah. And I want to say just in a little bit in response that I love competition. I have no problem with it. It's adversarial that I have a problem with. There would be no NFL, there would be no Major League Baseball if they didn't cooperate in order to create a field of competition. So I I don't have a problem with that word. I will say that. And I also do have a problem with the word adversarial. When the teams start seeing each other as the enemy in such a way that it demonizes and makes them less, then that, to me, is an important distinction. And I think that in the emerging worldview, there is going to be the competition, the way we look at it, is going to change because there's no way we can't not cooperate. We've already created, like you said, Marianne, we are already a global community. He said as he punched the go button on his Amazon order.
Well, for me, competition, I see it completely differently.
Yeah, and I got that, but I want to make clear that there are different views of that, and that I don't have a problem with getting grades or watching a football game and someone win and someone lose, paying a less price for something because someone's made a better widget at a cheaper price. So those are important distinctions for us all to understand they're there. Bob, flourishing on earth, man, we kind of digress there, but I think it's all one package.
Well, let me start off by saying we're in a time that has never been seen before, because in the past, those who could flourish were those who were able to isolate themselves and protect themselves from the people who weren't flourishing. So you built yourself a castle. You built yourself forts to keep people from the other side of the river from crossing over. And the idea was that, we can only flourish if we can keep the other people from taking what is ours. And as we have moved into a technological and informational age, we have not only begun to exist globally, but we're beginning to realize that we are a global community because we have to. COVID is teaching us that very hard lesson right now, because if there's a new variant in South Africa, it's going to be in Canada next week. And if it gets to Canada, it's going to be in the United States the following week. And that's true of viruses, but it's also true of ideas. And we're the first, I can't say the first generation because we're coming to the age now where there's 2 or 3 generations beyond us that are existing with us. But we're the first series of generations that's had a global view, that's had a global economy, that's had the means to travel globally. And that is really what's forcing us to spread the flourishing, if you will, to more and more people. But let me just swing back to what you were saying about the NFL. There's an interesting thing happening in the NFL today that surrounds competition, and that is their emphasis against taunting. Because when someone makes a play, they intercept a pass, they tackle someone, they used to stand up and go, "I got you," and point at them and so forth, and do a slicing in the throat gesture and so forth. And the NFL has realized that those kind of actions don't lead to healthy competition. They lead to adversarial competition. And they're actually trying to change the way they approach the game. And it's a hard lesson for some of the players. But it's one that's definitely necessary. And I think that you can metaphorically look at that across a lot of different institutions today, where we need competition. I agree with you, but we need healthy competition.
That's right, well, and a regulation of it. And that's a bigger piece of this emerging culture that I'm talking about. What constitutes genuine fairness, genuine health, genuine wholeness of the interdependence? And again, let's hold on to the metaphor or the model of going from a pyramid, that's the guys in the castles keeping their and having the peasants serve them, from the bottom, if you will, to a circle where nobody is above anybody else. Everybody is facing everybody, and everybody is part of the same happening. And this is a very different. Marianne, you named some of the pieces of the pyramid too that we're moving from, and that circle model. I'll be honest. I watched just about all the NCISs and the FBI's. If they're not doing diversity, if they're not doing justice issues, if they are not literally at the intimate level of personal relationships pitching a circle paradigm versus a pyramid, I'll be damned. It's happening all over the place. And I really challenge our listeners to look for that. Look for it and say, hey, there it is. Yeehaw, I'm part of that. I'm going to keep those messages carrying on in my personal life. Marianne, go ahead. You had something. I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no, that's okay. I was just going to say that goes right back to the stories we tell, and your example of those television shows are great examples. And the idea that, I mean, even within, you see it where you see the different agencies, not just in an NFL or in a football game or in sports, but between FBI and CIA, and you start to, and local police departments, and whose territory is it, and we're starting to see that there's an aberration there. And I think the idea of competition is a way for us to excel. So my question is there another way that we can motivate ourselves to excel without having to beat someone else? And so that's where I go to with the competition. I absolutely see, yes, you score more, there's a winner, there's a loser, but a loser is not a negative connotation like it was. Yeah. And Bob, what you were talking about, like slitting the throat, it's not like I'm out to kill or be killed. It's more like, let's go out and have it. It's going back to kindergarten. Remember that book, Everything I Ever Learned? I learned everything I forget how it went, but everything I ever needed to know, I learned in kindergarten. And it was just, you go out and you play and you have fun and you compete, but you also, at the end of the day, it's a celebration about everyone and every ability. So,
but that's new. You see, that's new in our lifetime, and I think that it's infecting people our age and younger all over the place. Mostly because it's already predetermined by having our preset. I mean, we're born into this world that is that way. My view is try not to see. You see, you have to put a lot of energy in not seeing today. You have to get to an internet place where the bandwidth is very narrow and people share your views. The stories that are being generated now, people can't stop them. They can rail against them, but they can't stop them anymore. And that's part of us moving from a paradigm to the circle. Think about the power of the camera in your phone. That equalizes things. Do you think Aubrey's killers would have come to justice if there wasn't a cell phone? I don't think so. Over and over, there's a new world emerging. We are part of that new emerging worldview, and it is a worldview that is inclusive and that includes, if you want your garden to flourish, you have to tend it. You have to grow things in conjunction with each other. And we're trying to do that. We're the first generation to see the planet as a single garden. We're the first. And we're seeing a whole lot of the pathological aspects. But it's important for us to also see the remedies, the inclusive pieces, those creative pieces, those things that lead us to healthy, not just the pathology, but the path to wholeness and health. And I think that's what the best term I've come up with is this flourishing on earth. I want everybody, and Marianne, you said it, it's got to start with us. If you're not seeing a way to flourish in your own soul, and I think most are not. What do they say? We have 40,000 thoughts a day, and over half of them are negative. What the hell? That's not a flourishing mind. A flourishing mind is also not one that's cut off from its emotions, which is, if we're in the West, you can be assured your emotions and your mind are in somewhat of a conflict with each other. And that's part of the stories
but
we
you know,
need to tell.
it's a real struggle. It's a real struggle we're going through. We see it in virtually every type of institution that exists today, whether it's economic or social or whatever. I would posit that each step forward is going to be a struggle. For example, it wasn't but a few years or a few dozen years ago that the concept of a minimum wage existed. And that's been a struggle ever since it was first instantiated. And we're still struggling with it today. What's an appropriate level? We're beginning to say, well, let's not call it a minimum wage. Let's call it I'm losing the term now. I can't think of the term. Sorry, but that's just one aspect of it. The idea of universal health care that we're moving toward, or health care as a right, is a step in that direction. So there's so many of these things going on that we have to be able to, when we make a decision at the voting booth, we have to say, now, are the policies that this person I'm voting for moving us toward a situation where more people can flourish? And if that's not, then an ethical person has to vote against that individual that's not moving us toward that. And that's the kind of decision that each and every one of us can make each and every day. We can support those things that move us forward toward, instead of just competition, collaboration. We begin to work in teams. We begin to see how it's not just the CEO of the company that should benefit, but every worker in the company should benefit when there's a new product. And those kind of things, it's very, very difficult to move in that direction, because the CEO wants to keep all his money.
And there's
he
the
doesn't
thing.
want to share.
I want to come in there, because there's the piece right there. Over and over, and I can't remember the guy's name, he pays everybody a minimum of $70,000 a year. His company's worth has doubled since he did that. You see, it's going to take some courageous leaders in order to shift the paradigm and the facts. And remember I said earlier, one of the things we need to do in this flourishing on earth is move to fact-based values. Once we get there, then, Marianne, some of the things you said, I mean, we've got to get over some of that. How do we learn? We're not going to learn by putting those people down. We're going to learn because brave people and courageous people show there's another way that is more inclusive, and using that way to literally shut down the other people and their paradigm. And that's part of the battle that's going on. Consciousness does not happen in a sweet, swimmingly wonderful place. Consciousness happens in a wrestling place. I mean, that's the whole word Israel literally means to wrestle with God. Man, we are all Israel when it comes to this thing called reality and global civilization, I think. So I think the paradigm, the courage of the leaders is going to be paramount in this shift that is occurring. And the shift is going to occur whether those leaders do it or not. What we're seeing, and I'm going into the pathology now, is this constriction. As we move forward, it creates a wake of fear. You get white supremacy. You get a call to autocracy that only a limited number. Say what?
Pushing women back.
Pushing women back. I think that's exactly right. A misogynist piece. There's this constriction that's happening. Now, if we looked at the human body, that constriction is known as heart failure. Anginas is a constriction. When the heart attack happens, it's a constriction usually. We're going through a pathological piece, but there is something healthy that we are beginning to see. 100 years ago, I don't believe we could even say what was actually healthy. You know, I look at Perry Mason and all the doctors smoking. I watched the show about the Queen Elizabeth's father who stuttered, and they thought his smoking would help his lungs to help his stuttering. You know, we've come so far, and it's easy to lose sight of this. We are now, I mean, sitting here, we're having a podcast, and we're trying to envision a world culture that is flourishing. Before it would have been, we would have been called utopian dreamers. I don't think we're utopian dreamers. I think we're each onto something, and the front lines of this, what I call the final fight, which is not out in the world, but in our own heads, our own hearts. Comments?
Well, you know, I think, Redhawk, you know, when we think about what is healthy, and I think part of what's happening is we are waking up to the fact that these things that we're seeing in the outside world, in our society, are things that are created, that we have made. Those are institutions that are made up of people who have been living a narrative that is causing destruction. And as an individual, when we can see that we do have some power over our lives, but we don't have individual power, it's collective power. And that's when we can join together and we can make these changes based on a more holistic and healthy living for everyone, not just for us.
Amen. Bob, we're about there, man. Final comments, Bob?
Well, I agree with what Marianne just said, but I'll throw in my favorite word is balance, because the collective actions have to be balanced with our individual actions. And we have to, if we look at the world like an uncut gem, you know, and you want to cut and facet that gem to be the most beautiful it can be, you have to locate the weak points that you can cause to flake off. And I'm not a jeweler, so I don't know all the details, but we as individuals have to look at what we can do in society. And again, I'll go back to the voting booth, and I'll go back to expressing our opinions in appropriate ways, and finding other people that we can collaborate with. Those are all individual decisions, even though they lead us toward collective action. So if we want the world to flourish, we've got to make it happen ourselves.
Amen. Final comments, Marianne?
You know, Bob, when you were talking, I flashed on a cartoon I saw recently of two booths, and one of them said, lies and the easy way to go, and there's a line all the way down, the truth and the difficult path, and there's one or two people walking that path. And I think that's our task. We have to be willing to change. We have to be willing to look at our own assumptions, look at our own conditioning, look at what we have been taught to be true and real, and challenge those things to make sure that we are actually following a path of truth and of what is best for the whole.
Amen. Amen. And again, there's this link, an amazing link, that we have to establish between our values and what is true. It can't be based on some belief system, but a belief system rooted in the real. And we must also recognize there is a synergy that can happen, and within this new context that is happening between an individual, the society, and nature. And it's always been there. As a matter of fact, it created the most amazing thing that we live in. It's like a fish in the water. It's called civilization. We miss civilization. We forget how unbelievable intricate it really is. You know, the supply chains to our food and our toilet paper. Boy, we woke up there. It's an amazing thing, civilization. From healthcare to everybody having a job, to everybody finding meaning, to it all working together. I mean, I just think of a house with the electrical and plumbing systems, and I go, wow, that's a happening. And then I think of civilization with all the systems happening and being managed. Holy moly. Are we blessed or cursed? Civilization. We hope you'll join us in our next podcast, and we're going to try to be civil and yet be honest.